What is up, everybody? Today's episode of the Trip Sitting Podcast is sponsored by Fungi. Fungi have taken the amazing benefits of kanna, which is a plant known for its mood enhancing and stress relieving properties, also sometimes described as nature's MDMA, and infused that kanna into delicious chocolates and gummies. Whether you're relaxing at home, out with friends, or just need a little boost during your day, Fungi has your back and uses high quality, ethically sourced ingredients to make their delicious chocolates and gummies. Check out the footnotes of this podcast to see how to order. It is completely legal, and you can use code TRIPSITTING to take 15% off your order. Again, use code TRIPSITTING for 15% off your order of Fungi chocolates and gummies. Today's guest is an educator and advocate in the world of entheogens, and she is an amazing woman who offers some really great courses that you should absolutely check out, and just definitely somebody that you should be following if you want to learn more about how to respectfully interact with these incredible substances. Today's guest is Mikaela de la Myco.
And sometimes I wonder if I need to be at the grindstone or actually rest,
I was literally going to be my next question. I know just from following you that you are involved in so many different things right now. How do you give yourself that time to rest? Because that's something I struggle with immensely, is when I have free time feeling like, oh shit, well, there's a million things I could be doing with that. Okay, well, I could be editing more podcast episodes. I could be reaching out to more people. I could be setting up meetings and things like that. So I have trouble just allowing myself to sit and not think about those things. And even when I am sitting and being like, no, I don't need to, I find my mind still thinking about all of the things that I feel like I should be doing. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, and it is interesting because kind of no matter what we end up with as a potential answer to that question, it is always in doing something. And there's nothing in my world that's wrong with it doing something, but the quality of the doing and the what I am doing, I think, is what I have been working out, considering the massive load of tasks and assignments that I have for myself and the anxiety driving desire to want to complete all of them as quickly as possible, leaves me feeling really hot and depleted and nervous. And I've done my best to learn what are the things that I do that, regardless of my list of things to do, when I participate in them, I feel whole and I feel like I've even readied myself more to take on the tasks that I have before me. And rest is one of them, and rest looks very different for everyone. And for me, rest can be restful activity, like watering my garden, or sitting outside, or laying in the sun, or fixing myself a cup of much needed nutritive herbal tea, and it's so beautiful because not only are those a thing that take time, they're a thing that slow my attention and regulate my attention and prepare me to better arrive at whatever massive list of things that I have. So it's really wonderful, before just jumping in to the crazy, which we will all eventually have to do, and chunk off little pieces of what's in front of us. I like to arrive at a restful activity first and be slow and make my tea, or like be outside in the garden or lay out in the sun. And from there, I can make way better decisions about what to do next. So, finding a better landing spot for which to make the decision to act has been very supportive for me lately.
Yeah, I like to like I'll go on a little just walk around my neighborhood sometimes, or um, I mean, just sit and meditate for 10 minutes. Like just even doing something like that definitely helps me arrive at the better spot. But even when I'm doing it, I still definitely sometimes find myself thinking about the thing I have to do next while I'm doing the activity. So I like the idea of maybe something a little bit more active that I have to
Mm-hmm.
actually give my attention to, like you said, like watering your garden or something. Honestly, I fucking hate folding laundry. It's one of my least favorite things ever. But I will say, when I know I have a bunch of laundry to fold and I finally actually do that, like there's no way to make it go faster. I have to just be there doing it. It's going to take as long as it takes. I do genuinely find myself afterwards being way more calm
Mm-hmm.
because I did the thing. My space is clean, but it just always takes way longer than I want it to.
Right. Yeah. The looking at it is the hard part. The looking at
Yeah,
the mountain of
yeah,
things. And the getting and the doing of it, I think, is that chop wood, carry water that people talk
hmm,
about, as such a beautiful foundation point of integration. Like get into a tedious process, get into something that is we know we must do. And as a mom, just domestic work is work
hmm,
and it's unpaid labor. And, but it is very meaningful work. It is, yeah, the washing dishes. I particularly love like sweeping and reorganizing and cleaning up after my child and my housemates. And it's really nice. Like I find a lot of fulfillment in caretaking the home around me. I'm very fortunate to have such a beautiful home to live in, and it brings a lot of much needed appreciation. It's like, why do I work so hard? Why do I hustle? Why do I create the things I create to maintain this life that I have that is so
hmm,
special and precious to me? And how am I able to create all the things that I'm able to create because I have a home that's peaceful and nourishing? So it is this really beautiful feedback loop of chopping wood and carrying water and tending to our little corner of the garden if we can. So I'm really here for that. Like I'm really here for humble forms of um revolution and love and changing the world. And if we can't do it like in our bedroom or with our laundry, how are we supposed to be making like radical change in our world? So that's like the domestic revolutionary in me and the community based organizer in me, that it's like these tasks are necessary in order to do the assignments that we're given.
yeah. Shit, that's really beautifully deep. um,
Simple.
yeah, it's just like it's so simple. It's when you just get hit with something that is just so true. It's one of those feelings inside. It resonates through my whole body, and I'm like, just yeah, damn. Like when I definitely tend to maybe try to overcomplicate things sometimes and try to search for like this deep meaning within that. But sometimes the really deep meaning can just be very, very simple. And being able to zoom out and like find that simplicity within all of the chaos. Uh, damn, it's really important. So thank you for sharing that with me, Mikaela. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Um, so how long have you been a mom now?
So my son is 4.5 now.
Hmm.
And he was born November of 2019 and was born at home. I advocated for a home birth and wanted to make sure that if I was able to do that, that I could, and that decision was honored. And yeah, what an event! There was 9 people in my house, including my mother and my sister, and dear friends and my partner. And yeah, what a radical room. I would
Mhm.
probably make different decisions now about how many people I invite to my house for the birth. It's not a party. Um, and but wow, I felt like my son got like sung into the room, and so many people were celebrating his
Mhm.
arrival, which was so sweet. And he came down on a rainy day. We were all trapped inside my living room, and he came forward at like 6:36 in the morning that morning. And yeah, postpartum was a really interesting time. I'd had a relationship with mushrooms throughout my pregnancy, and I speak a lot about what that was like, ingesting mushrooms throughout at a variety of doses, and how meaningful those experiences were, and the things that I learned, and the very specific helpful pieces of their teachings that were really ideal for the birthing space. And we went through our postpartum period. I have a tradition of eating mushrooms on solstice, uh, winter solstice, and I hadn't missed one. And so I wanted to make sure I didn't miss one. So I had like my first larger dose back as a new mom when my son was 4 weeks. And that was a really meaningful initiation too. And I'm really grateful that I could sit with him as like a brand new mom and become who I was becoming, and let the old version of me kind of compost and change and morph and things. And I went back to work, and then COVID hit. And what an honor it was to get paid to watch my child. You know, we talk about that in like that lack of postpartum care, and our ability to be present for the first year of life is not afforded to so many people. It is in some, Northern European countries, right, where you get paid to stay and watch your child, but just by the sheer grace of timing,
Yeah.
I was able to be with my son for the first year and a half, like paid,
Yeah.
which what a privilege that was. And not only was I able to do that, but his two uncles that we lived with also got laid off and were paid to stay home. So I raised my son for the first year and a half with two uncles, which was perfect and super fun. And now he's pushing 5. And wow, the mushrooms did really wonderful work on him for sure. And yeah, I'm really honored, and I'm really blessed to have like a happy, healthy, smart, inquisitive, talkative, rebellious, you know, sweet young kid. What a gift.
Where did the decision to continue your relationship with with mushrooms while you were pregnant, and also postpartum, while you're, I'm assuming breastfeeding, I guess that might just be a bold assumption, but and to be also openly talking about that, like, was that something that you were scared to do? How did you know that it would be fine, and all of those, like, where's the wisdom that you got in order to make that decision?
Yeah, I'd already had a relationship with mushrooms for so many years. They
Mhm.
have been such a helpful ally for me. And when I became pregnant, um, that question sat on my heart very much around safety and like, is this the right thing to do? Should I pause things? What is the insight? Like, what is the insight that I need in order to feel the permission to either take a pause here or continue my relationship? And I had intuitive sense about safety, knowing what I've just known about psilocybin as like a remotely non-toxic, non-lethal substance.
Mhm.
However, this was a new experience in my body that I just did not want to wreck. And I took to asking around, and I'm so grateful that I had access to an abuelita who has insight and relationship and a history with psilocybin ingestion as a pregnant woman, and in her circle and in her tradition that she was raised in, what was the protocol, and what was available to them when they became pregnant. Was
Hmm.
psilocybin something that they would continue throughout their pregnancy? So I went directly to an elder and I asked her. And through a translator, she gave me an answer that was permission, in essence. And what was further permission outside of just getting her insight and then leading myself through what felt right for me, which was more of like a microdosing, maybe not a protocol, but just like as needed as I had already been doing. But I then was dosed by her at a very, you know, visibly pregnant state.
Hmm.
And that was kind of the start of the higher dose experiences. So um, I had a lot of work to do as a pregnant body anyway, dealing specifically with alcoholism. And I'd been a heavy drinker through my 20s. And it was a practice I did not want to bring into my family home was this proclivity towards alcoholism, which I was raised in, both sides of my family.
Hmm.
So I asked Mushroom if they would assist me in mending the tapestry that leads me to want to drink so heavily and so often and with a certain kind of person and drawn into this particular kind of social sphere that really requires me to want to drink.
Hmm.
So that was the question for which Mushroom presented the answers. And then in my larger experiences, later in my trimesters, so in the beginning of my third trimester, had a 3.5 gram experience, which was pivotal in my ability to cope with the fears of birth and the birth experience. So, I've always been a very open person. And I don't feel any shame around my use of mushroom and my relationship with mushroom. However, I became acutely aware that this was not an okay thing for mothers to talk about, especially during breastfeeding and pregnancy and at birth.
Hmm.
And because I saw that there is a fear in that conversation, it really made me want to be more pronounced about my discussion of it. Because if we're all afraid, someone's got to like step first and
Yeah.
be out. And so being out has been helpful for other people. And yes, I did ingest while breastfeeding as well. So through the entirety of the birth continuum from preconception, um, in early pregnancy, late pregnancy, not at the birth, but then postpartum and breastfeeding were my relationship dynamics with mushrooms. And so, what's beautiful now is that after doing research and study in the Mothers of the Mushroom research, lots of mothers make this choice. Lots of
Hmm.
mothers have felt permission to make this choice or had already made this choice and hadn't had a space to share yet.
Yeah.
So, yes, the range of relationship that mothers have, that I have, um, is not just the microdosing mom.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to kind of break through that trope of the microdosing mom because it's A, not very interesting at all. And B, it doesn't even scratch the surface on the complexity of relationship that mothers actually have with mushrooms. So I'm glad that the impulse to want to discover this for myself, build a body of knowledge around it, um, showcase my own story, not as permission, but like as permissionary for other people to give themselves their own permission and has now yielded or at least supported the entire movement of the conversation around can mothers have a relationship with mushrooms. And in the West, that's fairly new, but in
Hmm.
traditional teachings, not new at all.
So how did your relationship with mushrooms start? Like going way back to before the pregnancy, because you said you had already had a relationship with them. Was it through like ancestral traditions that you knew about? Was it just by happenstance you just happened to start your relationship with mushrooms, or like what was the beginning of that relationship like for you?
Yeah, I've been altering my state of consciousness since I was probably like 12 with substances.
Hmm.
Um, Before then, I'd had kind of my first breakthrough spiritual experience at a Christian summer camp. And through singing songs all night by a fire under the light of stars, had kind of like a merge of consciousness with like a benevolent force of nature. And that was, yeah, I did not have a context for that experience. It happened within the container of like a Christian camp, so there was, their own interpretation on what was happening to me, the Holy Spirit, whatever.
Hmm.
And the camp counselor like encouraged me to write in a devotional journal to God, and I just spent hours like, you know writing those devotionals. And what's amazing to me is now singing songs by fire all night and then journaling devotion. I still do to this day as part of my mushroom practice. So it's really interesting how like uh,
Shifted.
in, ingrained the practices were, but how they've made like a refinement towards that closer connection to what what language, what deity, what framework, those basic human skills,
Hmm.
very ancestral, like songs by fire and writing in a cave, right? Like this is all part of our digestion of the divine. And so I grew up in a religious household. So it's just like I was constantly interacting with like the spirit of God or, by whatever means. And usually it was through music because I sang in church choir. So my framework and foundation for connecting with spirit through like music and devotion was pretty well etched. Like by the time I was 4, I was already singing in church choir. So when I, as a youth, watching addiction move through my household, I really perceived altered states as like an interesting activity that the adults were participating in.
Hmm.
We had parties in the backyard, and I'd watch the adults get drunk and smoke lots of cigarettes, and sometimes even not. I wouldn't watch them do cocaine, but like they would be doing cocaine,
Yeah.
and so just I was no stranger to altered states of consciousness, but just like really needed to fill out which ones felt like my own. And so, yeah, by the time I was 12, I was smoking weed. And then I got addicted to opiates at 13, was thrown out of school for them. My father passed away. I testified against my grandfather for sexual assault, and like was really in a interesting place. And so, yeah, opiates were a big part of my life for those early high school years.
It sounds like you were using them at that point to like numb out maybe a lot of what was happening. Like, is that sort of the
Certainly.
reason behind that? Like,
Yeah.
did you know at the time that that was why you were doing it, or at the time were you a little less aware of it and just understood like this was just something you felt that you needed to do?
Yeah, the dissociative quality, like the zooming out quality was really nice. Like it would look like the room was really far away. So I didn't have a language for that, but I was like, oh wow, like everything's just kind of feels far and softer, right? Like there's this
Hmm.
like soft cushion of protection between me and my life and my terrible life circumstances. So yeah, that was very felt and something that I really reached for, because everything just felt so hard. I'd been bullied so much. I already had terrible self concept. And then this really dramatic, uh, experience of, my father being sick with cancer and like watching him go through treatment was like, yeah, I wanted to really like pull out from everything. So, yeah, I got into, his opiates and, those became a favorite of mine, but yes, very addictive and like very, had its own like shadow to it and stuff. And a character that like arose in me because of my relationship with it. And yeah, kind of meandered through high school, and thankfully at some point just was able to crack through and recognize, yeah, this is not going to be a helpful component in my life for very long. So made some switches and kind of got my act together in junior year, and was still, experimenting with like MDMA. I had not tried any classic hallucinogens until I made it to college, and
Hmm.
I had no fear going into it because I'd already changed my mind and scrambled it up so fucking much already at that point that I was like, this couldn't be any like more intense or weird or different than any of the experiences I had. I'd overdosed on morphine at 13. So yeah, I was like, well, like it probably wouldn't
Well,
even be close to as scary as that was. So yeah, I was first introduced to LSD, and it's really interesting because everyone thinks of me as like a mushroom lady, which I very much claim for myself, but I
mhm.
have a very close, loving relationship with LSD. And that was my first.
That was my first like
Yeah.
psychedelic love. That and
Yeah.
I did that actually after I did mushrooms. I did mushrooms. That was my first psychedelic my junior year of college, and then about 6 months later did LSD, and then that was what kickstarted me just wanting to understand what the fuck is going on here.
Totally. Yeah, no, it was such meaningful medicine for me. And MDMA had already been in my, life. And so I, yeah, had some relationship with like synthetics and things like that. So LSD didn't feel too scary for me. And I climbed to the top of a mountain with a friend of mine, and we dropped acid, and it was the perfect place under the blanket of stars, contemplating, he's from the Bay. So we were listening to like some hyphy music and drinking Hennessy. And yeah, it was just so wonderful journeying with Black people. Like I was very grateful to have found a resonance within, the psychedelic BIPOC community, even from jump,
Yeah.
and
What is
that was
your
something that I looked for sure in
what
my
is
future
your
experiences.
ethnicity?
So my mother was born and raised in southern Italy.
Mhm.
So we're Southern Italian on my mother's side. She was born there. So we're real close to the hip with the culture. And my father was a son of an detribalized indigenous Mexican woman. So along the US Mexico border, like she was born in El Paso, Texas, along the Rio Grande. So that territory, yeah, southeastern Texas and Mexico. They lived in Mexico as well. His mother is from there, and his father is Afro Caribbean. So
Mm.
Haiti, Dominican Republic, lived in Cuba for a lot of his life. So yeah, we hail from, the Mediterranean and Mexico and the Caribbean. So there's a lot of flavor. There's a lot of medicine that comes from those places. And it's been a really interesting journey finding where they meet and finding where they talk to each other and finding synchronies along those lines. So yeah, finding brown people and psychedelics was very important to me and not something that I always had access to. And after I journeyed with LSD for the first time, I remember I'd been participating in a community garden at school, and I felt so disembodied. LSD can be quite heady and fluffy and airy. And so I climbed down the mountain and I went to the community garden and put just my hands in the soil there and prayed and ate vegetables right off the vine and was like, wow, like I miss Earth. This was fun, but I miss feeling like a participant on this particular planet, which I had not been a participant in for the last 6 hours. So,
Mhm.
I lived in a community house at that time with some really beautiful women, and mushrooms made it through the house. And so I was introduced to mushrooms like in a group of, women living in a house together on a rainy day, ate mushrooms in the home, and was like, oh, this is that like that's that feeling of like where everything is clicking in, memory is like collapsing with time, and sound is collapsing with like my visions, and like my feelings are intact and I am crying and I am laughing and all those things that like LSD kind of gave me, except this like very meaningful connection with my body and with like the terrain that I was in. So it was what I was looking for. It was that like expansive consciousness while still being very much embodied. And so, you know, I was home. Like I was like, this is it for me. This is a substance that really grounds me and grounds me in spirit and grounds me in nature. So I'm really happy that I found mushrooms so much, especially in the context of like women's circles and relationships with other sisters and things like that. And I started journeying with some of the people in my household. And uh, fortunately or unfortunately, like they were kind of coded with this hippie revolution. That is the culture of mushrooms and the,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Pink Floyds and the Spongles and the like hippie, whatever, you
Grateful
know,
Dad.
a Grateful Dead. And like, you know, they're inviting me to go to like these shows and go to Venice. Let's eat mushrooms at Venice. And like, let's do all of
Mm-hmm.
this like basic hippie girl shit. And, you know, let's like make dream catchers. Like it was just so
Yeah.
like, you know, it was
Like
cute,
not
but it was
actually rooted in
it
in
was
them
very
feeling like they should do it. Yeah,
appropriative.
exactly. It was
Yeah, it
like
was
this is what
very.
the people do, so we're gonna just do it too and have no concept of why we're doing it.
We're also sophomores in college. Like, you know, we're also just out of high school and like, you know, kind of still figuring out what we even are about. And I'm very fortunate that through that, and actually at that time, I found my practice within sacred sex, and
Mm-hmm.
I found a teacher, like a Western Tantra teacher, and so I very much got closely connected to what it is to like culturally appropriate and like, you know, oh, I was a shaman in a past life and that kind of just like surviving the new age stuff. I call it that. Like I survived the new age. Because yeah, there's so much flim flam and like so much just, yeah, interesting language. And I went through, you know, my time as a intimacy care provider and sex worker in that Western Tantra context. And like thank goodness found like real women's circles and found like real ways of doing ceremony and was starting to get invited to come out to like women's ayahuasca retreats and like started kind of tipping through that space of do we need to do psychedelics like to find access to spirit? Can we find access to spirit through aligning with like the moon and like getting involved with nature in that way through these rituals and traditions? And so in that found the Santo Daime, where for which I drank ayahuasca for the first time. And then I started finding more what I call culturally competent spaces to journey. So I started eating mushrooms like with Mexica people, like with indigenous, like Mexican people, with
Mm-hmm.
the Nahuatl, like, and learning Nahuatl and learning like this ancient language that's so important to me. I am Nahuatl. And so this cultural competent framework was, my goodness, such an important part of finding the truth of what this medicine wanted to be like in my body, finding Black people, tracing histories of the African diaspora, mushroom usage back in ancient Egypt. Like I'm very connected to the culture of like Kemetic spirituality was initiated in like the Ma'at tradition. So like it's interesting. A lot of that got worked out in my early 20s, thank goodness. So that as I went through my mid 20s, I just had really beautiful frameworks for I am a Black person, I am an Indigenous person, and I am like a folk herbalist from Southern Italy. And like, how would those people have participated in spirit, in like psychedelic experiences, and trying to get as close to how my ancestors might have participated in these. So, yeah, I found lineage teachings, I found teachers, and that was foundational. So, I didn't come from a psychedelic tradition from very young. However,
Mm-hmm.
I came from a rich spiritual tradition and I came from a rich folk herbalist tradition from which these medicines like exist. So I'm glad I found my way through, and here we are. I'm turning 30 this year. So a decade of journey and exploration has led me to this moment.
Wow. That sounds like a really amazing journey. Were there any parts of that where you were I don't know, like surprised by some of the things that you were finding from some of these other traditions? Or like was it feeling like you weren't supposed to be in certain places, like using these medicines, or did it always just feel like you were being guided in the right place like the whole time?
Yeah, I'm really honored to have been like invited into spaces.
Hmm.
And even when I paid full price to go to something, I was asked to help, like either the leadership or um, the people helping the leadership. So that always felt like uh, being asked to be put to good use is always a decent sign. And so I'm really glad. I'm really glad that for the most part, I've not felt like an outsider in Indigenous based and Black based circles. If anything, what I was surprised by was how outside I felt in certain circles when they were led by predominantly white
Hmm.
leadership, you know, and how out of place I felt like, oh, I don't have like the cool, like 24 karat gold painted like blanket with sacred geometry on it, or I like don't have the right feathers, or I'm wearing the not like super conscious clothes, or, like I felt very out of place in some of those spaces. And so that really surprised me. And what continues to surprise me is that people eating medicine doesn't necessarily make them good people.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, it doesn't, eating psychedelics doesn't guarantee like morality, ethics, like, uh, thoughtfulness around privilege. Like it doesn't build all those things in. And I really am starting to see so much navigating, these unbalanced power dynamics with psychedelic practitioners, shamans, like doctors that are dosing people, researchers. It's amazing how medicine can make a superhero as easily as it can make a supervillain. And I think it's like doing really wonderful and interesting things around like amplifying certain aspects of the personality. And it can do so for behavior that can be destructive as much as it can be for behaviors that are generative. So that was a surprising teaching, because little me, with all of the like insights and peace that I had received from my mushroom experiences and my ayahuasca experiences, really thought, oh, psychedelics are like the answer
Hmm.
to the problem, the issue on the earth. And if everyone just had psychedelics, then maybe this whole planet would just be better. But pushing entheogens into broken systems will just yield more of the same. And
Yeah.
so that continues to amaze me. That continues to surprise me. And unfortunately, I'm becoming a little bit jaded at the whole thing, because of how often I see these things. So, yeah, like, I mean, even the event that we met at for the first time, there was just so much fuck shit going on in the background that I was like, what are we doing here,
Yeah.
with women's labor and women's time and not paying people? And just, I've found better ethics in like straight up Christians than in some of these people in the psychedelic community, or in the like new age spiritual community, or in the healing community. So that's been interesting. I'm no longer looking at psychedelics as a metric of goodness,
Yeah.
or access to
I
psychedelics as a metric of goodness.
I I agree with that, and I feel like this is something I've now maybe even said on like the past 3 episodes. But like I know a lot of people who take psychedelics and they're still assholes. Like just because somebody uses psychedelics does not immediately make them a good person. And I think that as I'm when I first started this podcast, like I was very focused on like this whole new age psychedelic landscape that's being built in this space, and like some of the studies and the legality, and I think as I've continued to meet people within this space, I want to say that I've been trying to almost distance myself a little bit and take a step back from the from how it's being shoved into mainstream society, because like for me again, it's just made me realize how much the system is already broken. And then I can see the fact that if you just put this, it's literally just as you said, shoving psychedelics into a broken system is not going to fix the system. I think it's just going to make it way more chaotic. Um, but it's helped me realize how broken the system is. But we need to focus on what are the other things that we could do to actually fix that first, and then, I think that people who want to use these substances will then be drawn to these substances, and the people who shouldn't be using these substances will probably be a lot harder for them to get access to them.
Mm.
Um, I think I like doing these substances within community. I used to be just very recreational with the way that I'd use LSD and mushrooms, and I still use them recreationally too. But I've noticed that when I am using them much more consciously and in some sort of ceremonial way, whether that's a traditional type of ceremony or just making my own type of ceremony with my friends and just being on the same page and tapping into the same energy, uh, I always just feel a lot more connected to myself and a lot more connected to people around me and spirit, rather than just, taking mushrooms and going to see a concert at Red Rocks. That just feels chaotic now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's as you said, pushing entheogens into a system that's already broken, as you said, creating more chaos, like it's really coloring the experiences that people are having navigating psychedelic community even, like we're having like a diffusion of the external issues of what, we were trying to escape in the first place, like the default world as people call it, is now just like rearing its ugly head in here because we haven't really solved the problem externally in the default world, and now they're just magnified, showing up on a smaller scale here. And it is really interesting that like newcomers with their doe-eye bushy tail, like, oh my God, like it's gonna be so great. And we're just gonna like be in a commune, and like everyone who does psychedelics must be so nice. And
They all love each other and they all really want the best for each other, and they're not going to fuck each other over.
it makes me so sad that like the newcomers get disillusioned like even so much quicker than we all did, because there was so much less access before that, like it was the seekers, it was the people like dedicated to finding this and like in the underground chat rooms like risking it for the biscuit, to get in here, and to like, you just have to like really ask around, and synchronicity has to guide you to the right thing, and now you could just do a very simple Google search and like someone's pushing a product on you. And I
I
consult with
get
a
I get microdose fucking ads on my Instagram, like
it's
actual
wild.
mushrooms to buy,
Yeah,
and yet there are people within this space, like community leaders, that are actually pushing for harm reduction and safe access, that are getting banned by Instagram left and right.
totally.
But if you're paying them to promote something, no issues.
Right. Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think within this community, of, people that have been in here for a little while and have just seen kind of the pacing of things and the outcomes that have been occurring, everyone's kind of choosing a lane, as you mentioned, like harm reduction, and safe access and things like that. Like it's beautiful to see people in our community kind of taking the helm and wanting to create, safeguards and self-regulatory systems, because they're not here yet. And I really do believe in like agency and self-determination. And I would love to see our system do that for itself. And everyone choosing their own lane is very important. There's inspiring things to be done here. And it's like psychedelics brought us all to a party. And how are we going to act at the party? Who's going to be on cleanup crew, who's going to be the hype person, like, but inviting more people to the party and none of us taking on a role doesn't make very much sense. And so for me, like what I've been seeing so much of, and as I mentioned before, is just uh, abuse of power, abuse of these power dynamics, and a whole like slew of survivors coming out of these experiences and not having a community that's like attuned to listening to them, attuned to like supporting their now survivor body. Like, where is the herbalism and psychedelics? Where is the practices of repair on an individual level and on a community based level? Like, that really, that worries me, because if we're not either preparing people to be able to protect themselves going into experiences, and if we're not attuned to listen to them, and we don't have the skills in order to help them mend their tapestries, like, we're going to have a lot of broken people leaving psychedelics and leaving with a really sour taste in their mouth. Like, I was just chewed up and spit out from this community because they have no, sensual assault survivor literacy and like no herbalism protocols. So for me, like, coming from a folk herbalism background, I herbalism is missing from the psychedelic conversation. It's
Mm-hmm.
so weird to me that we work with these substances that are quote unquote plant medicine, but like people don't have basic like herbalism preparation knowledge. Like, oh, you're gonna like have a mushroom chocolate company, but like you don't know how to make an herbal tea. Like, people like, reach out to me, and I'm on consults with people, and they're like, how do I really get the most out of my, microdosing practice, for example? And, after some lines of questioning, I'm like, well, do you drink like an herbal infusion every day of like nutritive herbs? Like, how is your basic like herbal nutrition? And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, no. And I'm like, well, you'd be amazed that you don't need to just keep adding more like mushrooms to your regimen,
Mm-hmm.
because if your body had like the nutrition, the sustained neuroplasticity and softness in your nervous system to be able to like deal with
Just
these radical
take it.
changes,
Mm-hmm.
you would be amazed at how much benefit you could receive from adding now medicine to a nutrified body.
Yeah.
These medicines require a lot of us, like mineral content wise, require a lot of us as far as caloric intake and like and output. And I'm like, yo, people are like blasting off and like not remineralizing, or like they're blasting off and they're not like following up with like nervous system support measures to like continue and maintain neuroplasticity. And so they're just like collapsing back to the person they were. Practitioners are like, just take more medicine. You need to take like mushrooms every month to like really get this. And I was like, no, what if you just like had mushrooms one time and then just followed up with like helpful plants that could just like bolster your like ability to sustain these changes, and you
Mm-hmm.
would need to just not continue adding more medicine, but instead have a way more affordable, accessible way of maintaining like your ongoing integration. So it's just, yeah, those are just some of those like lanes that I feel really called to like work through, fill out, is like the psychedelic herbalism lane and the sensual assault advocacy lane. So I'm like, everyone's going to have their own way and their own special like assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And mothers and herbs and sensual beings are like my assignment. So there's a lot that I've been, with the help of lots of incredible people, thankfully have been able to find the others in the group of the others.
Yeah. uh, I've gotten so much help through the community that I've been able to find, but it was something that I definitely seeked out. Like when I first started using psychedelics, it was definitely much more like, listen to Grateful Dead and do this. And I'm still also partying and drinking alcohol almost the entire time while I'm using these substances too. But it was, through that eventually led me to actually seeking out ayahuasca and flying to Peru and experiencing that there with the Shipibo, which then once again led me to realizing, okay, there are people that do actually care about this here inside the United States. How do I find them? And so it's been a lot of seeking, and it definitely, like, I was not just led into a community, and I still don't, like, I'm still finding the people that are here within me, and a lot of the people that I'm friends with are live nowhere near me now, but I still consider them like part of my tight knit community. And I say all of that to say I think that has almost been more healing than any of the experiences that I've had with the substances themselves, of just being able to talk about them in relation to community and understand that there are other people that are just asking the same questions and seeking these answers and care about doing better and being better and are actually meaning that. And
Mm-hmm.
so trying to then take these substances and put them into a westernized clinical model of, oh, come in, take this substance and then fucking leave, like that's not going to, in my mind right now, I don't think that's going to do people good in the long run. I think that everyone is just going to truly end up in the exact same place that they started in. Um, if we don't change the way that we interact within community and actually just support each other as human beings.
Yeah, I mean, pushing integration into a clinical framework requires a person to have to pay in order to engage with this material, where this material is not going to exist in like the vacuum and the bubble of, the clinical setting, but instead this person's going to experience the insights and the nuances and the change of perspectives, you know, daily, coming into their experience and leaving their experience. And I just find that, like, when I care for people and talk to them about, oh, they want to start microdosing or they want to take a bigger journey, like one of my first questions is like, what does your household look like? Who's in it? Who do you talk to on a daily basis? Do they know you're getting into this? Like, what is their literacy? Do you have a friend that knows a little bit about psychedelics? Who are your people around you? Because if you're going to be dealing with like resistance at home, like in an environment that people don't condone what you're doing and having to do this in isolation, like being reliant on that system might leave people really lacking the support and the networks of what it is to be able to bring this into your daily life as like a lived experience. And instead we'll just have to kind of compartmentalize it to, I only engage with this material like in a paid way when I'm talking to my integration coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then outside of that, nothing else is ceremony or nothing else is worth engaging with. And it is really tough because for some people, they don't have literate communities. Like they don't have a partner that wants them to journey. They might not have a partner at all. They might live alone. They might have, other access to community issues because
Mm-hmm.
not everyone has access to psychedelically literate community. But that's where I am actually grateful for the openness and accessibility that psychedelics have been like permeating through the overculture and the 3D and the, default world. And like there is actually a basic literacy kind of arising in the
Mm-hmm.
general population around mushrooms and even in some ways around MDMA. And it's really cool to see that people on like hyper conservative spectrums and then very liberal spectrums and everywhere in between, and anarchists and poor people and rich people and moms and children, like are now engaging with the knowledge that people are using psychedelics as
Yeah.
either a healing framework or like a way of life. And it's just so important to me that the diversity and the range of voices available to tell that story are centered. Like we cannot have the same kinds of people telling this story, that, mothers deserve to tell their stories with it, that women of color and queer people and trans people and people that are on the lower edges of socioeconomics and beyond deserve like platforms for which to share their personal relationships with medicine. And I think that will give the general public a way more well-rounded view of what this experience can be like for a lot of people. Because it's certainly not just the ayahuasca retreat center
Mm-hmm.
CEO, or it's not the, microdosing mom that just has a microdose instead of a glass of wine. Like there is such range available
Yeah.
here. So for anything that I am grateful for, I am grateful at like the general literacy, and feel that that literacy needs to be brought up a
Hmm.
lot more. And
But it's
that is
there, and that's a
that's
start.
starting,
Yeah.
and that is going to hopefully start to create better community based integration and preparation like outcomes for people that like are even navigating psychedelics through a Western medical framework, but also like want to exist outside of it too.
Hmm.
No matter what, no matter how you slice it, like basic human and psychedelic literacy on like a lateral level is what's necessary for like really weaving integration as a real possibility for the humans.
Yeah.
And for me as a folk herbalist, like
I was gonna say, I feel like
herbal
that has a lot to
knowledge
do with.
is so lateral. Like
Mhm.
the way that it's taught, the way that it's shared is like you're in a kitchen with your grandma, like the aunties are around, they're teaching you stuff. It's like you are embedded in a rich tapestry of people that have maybe even folk knowledge, like even maybe their own interpretation of this plant. They don't have the scientific name, they don't have like the specifics, but they have what we learned about this by living with it and having lived experience with it. And so, like, when we're talking about squeezing psychedelics into broken models, not only just the therapeutic model, I think, has its own special kind of framework of harm, but also the higher education model of like the only people that deserve to know and interact with these substances are people that like have their bachelor's and their master's and then go get like a doctorate, in
Yeah.
psychedelic study. And I'm like, well, then you're leaving so many people out from the conversation of like who can serve, who has knowledge about it, and like who deserves to know, and
Hmm.
everyone deserves to know, and children deserve to know. And so that's why I deeply advocate for like educating young people and like young people journeying and having literacy and watching the adults, you know, have this as part of their communities. As someone who grew up watching their parents drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, and do cocaine, like that is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for kids to be participating in adult activities where mind altering substances are being passed around. So, like, why are we judging when the community is maybe interacting with a different substance and there's kids around? And now kids can ask the adults about what they're doing and how they're experiencing their lives. And for people that speak with me, sometimes there's like an obsession around like, you must be dosing your kid, or like if you have entheogens in the home, or if you like are engaging with this as material, then like, oh, the kids are doing mushrooms. And it's like, well, you'd be amazed how beneficial and how much children benefit from just being downwind
Hmm.
from like people that journey with medicine in an intentional and kind and literate way. Like
Yeah.
we are constructing our entire household as a community of people that have our own individual and collective relationship with entheogens. And so, we have a housemate coming in, just last night, we're all eating dinner. She just sat with hikuri or peyote. And then Martin, my son, is like, so how was ceremony? And, did you
Hmm.
learn anything? And like, so it's just like, it's very natural for children to grasp these concepts. And if we're going to have an issue embedding children in ritual and ceremony and literacy with psychedelics, then we should take just as critical of an eye bringing our kids to church.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. Now, before we started, you had talked about a class that you have coming up.
Yeah. So speaking of just like lanes and community and like what I see as valuable and important in our psychedelic community, and the literacy that we need to bring up, is the literacy I see us needing to bring up a lot more is our sensual assault literacy, and also our basic herbalism literacy, our somatic care literacy, and our protection and advocacy protocols. There's a lot that's missing as far as like journeyers and practitioners alike knowing how to like protect themselves or help themselves move through when things go wrong, what plants are supportive in psychedelic preparation and integration, what plants can be supportive for survivors if we are going to be caretaking for survivors, and if sensual assault affects 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and 1 in 2 trans people. Like, we are bound to come in contact with someone that has sexual assault in their history, or might experience it in the future, or might be dealing with it presently. And what skills do we have as a community in order to meet the needs of those people? Are we attuned to like caretake for someone that has sexual assault in their history? And as a community generally, are we equipped to meet the needs of when survivors are going to come forward? Because with the Ma'at action, the Matriarchal Alliance for Accountability and Transparency, like, I'm caretaking survivors right now that were harmed by a social media influencer in the spiritual community. And like, after coming forward with the allegations, like, we have not received a lot of support from his community or other communities in like, wow, this was really wrong. What can we do to help make this better? There's like so much still gaslighting, so much still, it's just allegations. Where's the proof? Like, there's just so much still resistance in the education that people have around, yes, this was possible. And yes, bringing allegations forward is not destroying a person's reputation for the things they did and said. It's like making a person's reputation current with like how they are behaving. So, yeah, it's been, a soft spot. And so as an answer to some of those things, because as we've talked about, like helping survivors bring their stories forward, helping to mend the tapestries that people experience when they're harmed by practitioners. The question that is often asked is like, well, what do we do to prevent this stuff? What do we do to like, make sure that this stops happening? And for me, like, education is liberation. So I'm like, we should be like training practitioners to be attuned to this and to have skills and to know how to identify the shit within themselves. And we should be training like journeyers alike to know how to protect themselves, how to journey safely, and then how to tend to themselves and others when things go wrong. And ecosensual is kind of like an answer, the feedback loop to that kind of thing. I see a future where we're advocates surrounded by advocates, super well insulated with lots of practices and protections and plants that like we can't be touched or fucked with because we know too much and we're too well connected. So that's the prayer that we have. And the form that prayer comes in is as an educational offering. It's a 15-week training for practitioners and journeys alike. We have herbalists in the space, we have birth workers, we have psychedelic guides, integration coaches, all kinds of people in the spectrum of like care professions. And this could even be a traditional therapist, for example, or a researcher, or anyone who like is going to interact with the public in some way and wants to know how to better meet those needs. And anyone who has sensual assault in their history as well would benefit from a class like this. We take 15 weeks to endow people with all of this like indigenous based, earth based knowledge, and teach live medicine songs. And it's like this really sweet container. And you leave with a great deal of transformation, and like subtle transformation and also big transformation. And I lead it with another Indigenous teacher. Her name is Brittany Jade Wilson. She started the original instruction school. And we have a litany of guest teachers, some bilingual, so some Peruvian women come and speak. And we do our best to keep a very beautiful, diverse, European and also Indigenous and also Black whenever possible too, to build this knowledge base in folks. So that's the ecosensual training. And it's amazing what these students go off to become. Like they lead their own, microdosing journey experiences for specific, populations of people like mothers and survivors, or like some of the advocates that came out of that class ended up doing a lot of work for us with the Ma'at action and the action of supporting survivors in real time. Like, we need advocates more than ever. They go and work in different organizations, being the buffer person for when these conversations go haywire around sex and psychedelics, and like someone pops off and they need someone to caretake for them. So it's just amazing how common these emergences of sensual assault and like need for the community to respond and how little advocates we have here.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just building a beautiful team of people that are quite literate in both the herbalism way and also what my teacher calls the grandmother way of like being beautiful, present, wise, and ever knowing. And maybe in my way, like being more active and being really boots on the ground with like bringing some of these actions together. So you get me, you get my teacher, Brittany Jade Wilson, and a lot of guest teachers together in a tight container of like education and healing herbal knowledge.
Nice. That sounds amazing. That sounds like it's very in line with what you've been called to do within this space and being able to share that with others to just create more of an informed space and community. So when does that start?
So our first class is July 7th. So 7/7 of this year. It'll be a summer into fall class.
Cool. Well, Mikaela, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story and just being so open about everything in your life. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to get to know you better.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was nice to meet you in Colorado in person. And yeah, what a funny place to find each other. But I'm really glad that we did. And I hope Colorado is doing things. I just recently like read a sentence in one of the underground like signal chats or whatever. It's like Colorado is one of the safest places to talk about psychedelics. And so I'm glad you're there. You know, I'm sure it's a very different landscape that you're in than I'm in. So I'm glad that you have like the freedom and the privilege to be able to engage in like, you know, more community and organizing and boots on the ground in a way that's like less, I don't know, you don't have to be guided so much by like the fear of being prosecuted or persecuted. So
Hmm.
I really, I see the benefits in opening this space up to the general public. And I also just want to make sure that we have some frameworks in place so that those new people coming in know how to act and know where to go if they see something that doesn't feel right for them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, thank you again. So much
of
love to you.
course. Yeah, Plazagamati.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure that you give us a rating if you feel called to do so. So that way we get in front of more viewers, and make sure that you are following the podcast on Instagram and TikTok at _trip_sitting_. Thanks again. I hope you all have a beautiful day. I love and appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll see you next episode.